He stood there trembling, but he wasn't the one on trial. That's the part folks don't usually understand. Sometimes the person sitting in the nicer suit, the one with the polished shoes and the higher bank account, is carrying the heaviest guilt in the room. Patricia's voice cracked through that courthouse silence like she'd spent years holding it in, and the man who once swore he loved her, Joseph, felt every word land on him like a truth he could no longer outrun. He left when I told him I was pregnant. The courtroom stayed still, but his whole world shook. By the time this day is over, a millionaire will be forced to face the one truth money could never cover, and a mother will finally speak the hurt she carried alone. But here's the part that stings. Every person watching from those wooden benches already had an opinion about him. You could feel it in the way they shifted, the way their eyes narrowed, the way a few folks folded their arms like they were waiting to see whether he'd lie. The way a man like Joseph always lied. That quiet judgment rolled through the room long before the judge ever opened his mouth. People weren't just listening to Patricia's testimony. They were deciding what kind of man Joseph really was, the one he pretended to be, or the one he proved himself to be the day he walked away. There was a moment, so quiet you could almost feel the breath leave the room, when every eye shifted toward Joseph, waiting to see if he'd finally tell the truth. A question hung in that silence, unspoken but loud enough to tighten every chest. Does a man ever really escape the choices he ran from? Patricia's words were still echoing when Joseph suddenly pushed back his chair and stood, but because the weight on his conscience finally refused to stay seated, Judge Reese looked up with a steady gaze, the kind of gaze that let you know he'd already seen more than Joseph ever admitted. And heartbeat, let me ask you something real. Have you ever loved someone who disappeared right when life hit its hardest? Have you ever watched a truth sit in someone's eyes while they pretended not to see it? Because this, right here, and a judge who knew the truth long before the paperwork arrived, is a story about a man who ran when responsibility knocked, a woman who carried the cost of his absence, a little girl who didn't even know his name. So the question becomes, when a man spends years dodging the consequences he created, what does he do on the day those consequences finally call him forward? And when love shows up again, not soft, not gentle, but demanding payment, who pays the price? Let me stop you right here, because this next part matters. Most folks think a courtroom is just law and paperwork, and the way Joseph's shoulders finally dropped, as if life had decided this was the day he couldn't pretend anymore. But sometimes, it's the only place a broken truth finally stands up straight, and on that morning you could almost sense the shift, not from the judge's gavel, but from the way Patricia lifted her chin. Here's the part that keeps people watching. A man who built an empire was about to face the one thing he couldn't negotiate, couldn't charm, and couldn't buy his way around. A truth he left behind in Beaumont, and a daughter who didn't even know his face. Here's the moment where the heart of this story opens, quiet, honest, and heavy enough to change the air in that room. Because when Joseph finally lifted his eyes, he wasn't looking at Patricia. He wasn't looking at Judge Reese. He wasn't even looking at the people waiting to hear whether he'd lie again. He was looking at the empty space beside Patricia's chair, the space where his daughter should have grown up knowing her father. And that's when it hit him. The real punishment wasn't the courtroom. It was the 5 years he could never get back. Welcome back to Mr. Dave Stories, where every story reminds us that growth is possible, healing is real, and lessons are everywhere. If this is your first time here, we're honored to have you. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story that might uplift, inspire, or change the way you see life. And if you're already locked in with us, go on and tap that like button so YouTube knows this moment matters. Because heartbeat. What happens next in this story isn't just about judgment. It's about the kind of truth that can rebuild a family or break a man completely. Sunday mornings in Beaumont always carried a certain hush before the day stretched awake, and Patricia felt it settle across her small home as she blinked into the warm lights sliding through her curtains. The air already carried that familiar Gulf humidity, the kind that made the morning feel fuller, heavier, like the day had something to say before anyone started talking. She lay there for a beat, letting the quiet wrap around her. Then, as always, came a soft thump from the hallway, followed by a whisper that was supposed to be sneaky. "Mommy, you up?" Patricia smiled into her pillow. Elise never whispered as quietly as she thought. "Come on in, baby," Patricia called, lifting her head. Elise's curls bounced into the room first, followed by her bright brown eyes and sleepy grin. She wore her little yellow church dress, the one she insisted made her look like sunshine, even though Patricia hadn't ironed it yet. "Look, Mummy, I'm ready." Elise twirled, arms out wide, the hem wrinkled and crooked. Patricia laughed, sitting up. "Lord, you didn't even give me a chance to fix you up." Elise hopped onto the bed. "I want to be early today. Miss Carla said I can hand out the programs." "Well," Patricia said, brushing a curl off Elise's forehead, "we need to make you look the part. Sunshine needs straight seams." Elise giggled as Patricia pulled her close, inhaling her daughter's sweet morning scent. A mix of cocoa butter and the strawberry shampoo they stretched an extra week by adding water. Patricia pressed a kiss to her cheek and stood. The house was small, but it was theirs. Soft light bouncing off old picture frames, hand-me-down furniture, and a kitchen with a persistent stove rattle she'd long stopped noticing. Patricia moved through it with practiced grace, opening the lunchbox she had packed the night before, with leftover okra and cornbread from her aunt's recipe. Elise loved that cornbread so much she called it yellow cake, which always made Patricia laugh. "Mommy, can I wear my sparkly shoes today?" Elise called from the bathroom. "Baby, those shoes squeak too loud for church." "Wear the white ones," Patricia replied, sliding slices of apple into a sandwich bag. "I like the squeaky ones." "I know you do," Patricia said softly, "but Pastor always looks at you funny when they squeak during prayer." Elise sighed dramatically, and Patricia chuckled. That little girl had more personality than most grown folks she met at the diner. When Patricia reached the bathroom, she found Elise standing on a stool, chin up, waiting for her hair to be styled. Patricia always took her time here. These were the moments she cherished. She parted Elise's curls with gentle fingers, smoothing them with coconut oil, her hands moving with the unspoken rhythm passed down through generations. "You know," Patricia murmured, "your grandma used to do my hair just like this. She'd hum the whole time." "Hum like you?" Elise asked. Just like me." "Hum now," Elise commanded, pointing at her mother with adorable authority. Patricia laughed, shaking her head. "All right, bossy boots." She hummed a soft tune, a church hymn her own mother sang, while Elise swayed in place. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, a small ritual in a world that often felt too big. By the time they stepped outside, Beaumont was alive with the scent of cut grass and the sound of neighbors greeting each other across porches. Miss Allen, their older neighbor, waved from her rocking chair. "Morning, baby," she called. "Looking like springtime, little Elise." Elise grinned shyly and squeezed Patricia's hand. Patricia waved back. "Morning, Miss Allen." The church stood only a few blocks away, white-painted wood glowing in the sun. As they approached, the familiar hum of voices greeted them. Folks in crisp shirts and colorful dresses clustered near the entrance, exchanging hugs and weekend gossip. "Good morning, sister," a church mother said, pulling Patricia into a warm embrace. "You look tired, baby. You getting rest?" Patricia laughed softly. "As much as I can with this one running me ragged." Elise shot her a playful glare. Inside, gospel music floated through the air like a comforting blanket, filling the sanctuary with something deep and stirring. Patricia always felt at home here. Not because her problems disappeared, they didn't, but because this room carried her through them. The familiar faces, the warm nods, the chorus of amen scattered in all the right places. It was community in its purest form. As she took her seat, Patricia bowed her head in quiet prayer. She didn't ask for much. Mostly strength, mostly guidance, mostly peace where her heart still ached. She never said Joseph's name out loud. But some wounds didn't need names to be felt. Elise tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, can I go practice handing the programs?" "Go ahead, baby. Don't run." Elise started off, not running, but moving fast enough to make the church mother at the door give her the side eye. Patricia smiled softly, watching her daughter's confidence radiate. The pastor's voice echoed through the room as he began service, speaking about faith through seasons of loneliness. Patricia felt her chest tighten. It wasn't that she was unhappy. She'd built something stable, something loving. But there were moments, quiet ones like this, where the old hurt rose like a shadow across her ribs. She had raised Elise alone, proud, exhausted, determined. but some nights she wondered what life might have looked like if Joseph hadn't walked away. If he had stayed, if he had fought for them, if he had even tried. But wondering never paid a bill or filled a lunchbox, so she learned to tuck those thoughts away. After service, Patricia and Elise headed home briefly before Patricia changed into her diner uniform. Elise sat at the table coloring, humming the same tune Patricia had hummed that morning. Patricia stood at the counter tying her apron, looking at her reflection in the microwave door. "You okay, Mommy?" Elise asked. Patricia turned, smoothing her daughter's curls. "Yeah, baby. Just thinking." "About what?" Patricia hesitated. "About grown-up stuff." Elise nodded seriously. "Oh, boring stuff." Patricia laughed softly. "Pretty much." She dropped Elise off with Camille, who greeted her at the door with a playful smirk. "Girl, you look like you got a whole sermon on your shoulders." "Don't start," Patricia sighed, adjusting her apron. Camille winked. "I'm just saying, you've been deep in thought lately." "I'm fine," Patricia insisted. But Camille gave her that knowing look. "You let me know when you want to talk." Patricia promised she would, though she wasn't sure she could. Camille meant well, but there were pieces of her past she'd buried so carefully that she feared what might happen if she dug them back up. As she walked to work, the sun felt hotter than usual, and something in her chest fluttered, the quiet sense that life was shifting in a direction she couldn't yet see. Something was coming. She didn't know what, but she felt it all the same. And as she pushed through the diner door, offering a practiced smile to the regulars and tying her hair back, a question drifted through the back of her mind like a whisper she couldn't shake. What does strength look like when nobody sees the struggle? The lunch rush at the diner always came in slow waves on Sundays, like the whole town needed a moment to shift gears from morning worship to afternoon appetite. Patricia stepped behind the counter with that familiar mix of routine and resilience, tying her apron a little tighter than necessary. The smell of frying catfish and seasoned potatoes drifted through the air. Comfort food, the kind Beaumont folks swore could heal almost anything. "Pat, you moving slow today," called Mr. Gaines from the corner booth. He was a regular, always sipping sweet tea like it was a competition. "I'm moving just fine," Patricia replied with a half smile, grabbing the pot of coffee. "Your tea too sweet today? Sure looks like your spoon's about to stand up in it." The old man chuckled. Now, don't be picking on me. That's the only joy I got left besides this booth right here." Patricia grinned and topped off his tea anyway. "Try water next time." She moved through the space with an ease born from repetition, greeting folks, jotting orders, navigating tight aisles without bumping elbows. The diner wasn't fancy, but it had soul, chipped red booths, mismatched napkin dispensers, the faint buzz of an old jukebox that never quite played loud enough. It was a place where people lingered, where the town breathed in real time. From the back, Camille slid through the kitchen doors with a plate of hush puppies in one hand and trouble in her eyes. "Girl," she whispered dramatically, "why you look like you've been thinking hard thoughts all morning." Patricia shot her a look. "I'm fine. That's what people say right before they aren't fine." Camille leaned in closer. "Come on. You know I can tell. You had that same stare last year when Elise stuck a bead up her nose." Patricia groaned. "Lord, don't remind me. I'm just saying, your face be narrating its own story sometimes." Patricia pretended to ignore her, wiping down the counter with more focus than wiping required. Camille popped a hush puppy into her mouth and continued without shame. "So," Camille said casually, "we got the school fundraiser coming up. You seen the flyers?" Patricia nodded. "I saw them in the hallway at church." Camille said slowly. "Anything interesting catch your eye?" Patricia shook her head. "Camille, I swear." Camille held up both hands. All right, I'm just asking. Because I heard, and I'm not saying it's true, but I heard, the event got some new sponsor money this year." Patricia paused mid-wipe. "Okay, and I heard," Camille continued, lowering her voice like she was about to reveal the final answer on a game show, "that the sponsor is somebody we used to know." Before Patricia could respond, the bell over the diner door jingled, and 3 teenagers rushed in laughing. Camille straightened and flashed Patricia a knowing grin before walking off to seat. "Them." Patricia watched her go, shaking her head. Camille lived for drama the way some folks live for dessert. Patricia gathered menus, but the word still itched under her skin. Somebody we used to know. She shook it off. Beaumont wasn't that big. People returned, people left, people stayed. It didn't always have to mean something. But the thought settled anyway, a small knot tightening beneath her ribs. Between tables, Patricia ducked behind the counter to catch a breath. She reached into her apron pocket for her pen and felt something else, the worn corner of the photo she kept but never looked at unless she was alone. She hesitated, then slid it out carefully, holding it just low enough that customers wouldn't see. Her and Joseph, young, unafraid. Back when life felt wide open and simple. Patricia traced the edges with her thumb. She remembered the day they took it, a crawfish boil behind the church, laughter and heat and music filling the air. Joseph had wrapped his arm around her like he never wanted to let go. She believed him then, believed in forever. But forever didn't show up. She slipped the photo back into her pocket right as Camille reappeared, waving a notepad dramatically. "Caught you," Camille whispered. "Girl, I knew you were in your feelings." "I wasn't," Patricia said quickly. "You were holding that picture, weren't you?" Patricia sighed. "You need to mind your business." "I am your business," Camille declared proudly. "Now spill it. What's going on with you today?" Patricia shook her head. "Nothing. Just tired." Tired looks different on you. This looks like the Joseph kind of tired." Patricia stiffened. "Don't say his name in here." Camille raised an eyebrow. "Still that deep?" Patricia didn't answer. She didn't need to. Camille knew. Everyone who'd been around back then knew. Patricia had been happy once, deeply, foolishly happy. And then Joseph had disappeared like a chapter ripped out of a book. No warning, no explanation worth believing, just gone. She'd carried the weight, the child, the life that came after. Before Camille could push further, Sheriff Turner, thankfully unnamed but recognizable in presence, walked in and waved. "Afternoon, ladies, afternoon," Patricia replied, grabbing a menu. He settled into a booth and glanced at the laminated paper on the table. "Y'all got new dessert specials?" Camille perked up. "Sure do. Peach cobbler and pecan pie." Patricia shot her a look. "We do not have pecan pie. The machine froze last night." "Shh," Camille hissed. "I was trying to see if he'd buy it." Patricia rolled her eyes. "Ignore her, sir. We only have cobbler today." He laughed, placing his order. Camille wandered off again, humming loudly enough to distract half the room. Patricia refilled sugar caddies, grateful for the small distraction. But as she moved toward the coffee station, she overheard two women at the counter chatting. "You see that article?" one asked. "The school fundraiser next month?" "Oh yeah, they said we got a major donor this year. Big stuff." What was his name? Caldwell? Something Caldwell, I think." Patricia froze. She didn't breathe at first, didn't blink, didn't move. Caldwell. Her heartbeat tapped against her ribs like it recognized the sound faster than her mind did. She stood there, coffee pot in hand, eyes fixed on the napkin dispenser, as if it could explain the sudden shift inside her. Caldwell. Joseph Caldwell. It was a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years, but one she could never forget. The father of her child. The man who walked out when she needed him most. The man she once believed she'd build a life with. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was someone else. Caldwell wasn't the rarest name in the world. But Beaumont wasn't Houston. It wasn't New York. People didn't just stumble in and out of town. She turned, finding Camille already staring at her from across the diner. Camille's face said everything. "You heard it too, didn't you?" Patricia felt heat rush to her cheeks. Her hands trembled slightly around the coffee pot. "I'm gonna grab more filters," she murmured, her voice thin. She slipped into the back room, leaning against the counter as she set the pot down. For a moment, everything felt too quiet. The clatter of dishes outside muffled, the world pulling back just enough for her to feel the tremor of something shifting. She inhaled deeply, inhaled again, tried to find the steady place in her chest. But the truth was unavoidable. If Joseph Caldwell was the donor, if he was coming back into town, if he was stepping foot anywhere near her life, then the past she'd buried wasn't done with her yet, and that unsettling flutter in her chest wasn't just fear. It was something else she didn't want to name. She pressed her palms against the metal counter to steady herself. Life was moving, and she had no idea where it was taking her next. Patricia returned to the diner floor with her breath tucked neatly behind her ribs, the way she always did when life pushed a little harder than she expected. She carried the coffee pot again, moving table to table like muscle memory was saving her from the swirl in her chest. But Camille kept watching her, eyes narrowed with the kind of concern that didn't need words. "You good?" Camille mouthed from across the room. Patricia nodded once, quick and tight, though the answer sat nowhere near her truth. She kept herself busy checking on Mr. Gaines again, wiping the same spotless counter, rearranging salt shakers that didn't need rearranging. But the name, that name, pulsed in her mind. Caldwell. She hadn't spoken it in years, but hearing it out loud in that diner hit like a quiet storm, rolling through her with memories she'd sworn she'd stopped replaying. Beaumont was small, but not so small that Joseph Caldwell should have resurfaced here of all places. He'd carved a life somewhere far removed from hers, chasing money and ambition while she chased stability and single motherhood. He belonged to Houston now, or wherever men like him went when they left everything behind. But if he was donating to a Beaumont school fundraiser, why? Customers kept coming in. Patricia greeted them on autopilot. "Hey y'all, take any seat, be right with you." But her mind drifted to a 5-year-old girl with bright brown eyes and curls just like hers. Elise, her daughter, their daughter. Would Joseph dare come back after all this time? Would he even care? Did he know about Elise now? Or had he always known and simply chosen silence? Questions she didn't want rose in her throat like heat. When the lunch rush finally slowed, Patricia slipped outside for a breath of fresh air. The sun hit her full force, but the heat didn't bother her as much as the tightness in her chest. She leaned against the brick wall, crossing her arms. Camille followed her a minute later, pushing through the door with her hip. "You ain't slick, Pat. I know that look." "I'm fine," Patricia said, though the words didn't carry much conviction. Camille said, stepping closer. "You're shaking." Patricia looked down at her hands. They were, just slightly. She curled them into fists. Camille softened. "Talk to me." Patricia took a slow breath. "I heard something earlier. I know." Patricia blinked. "You know?" "Honey, half the women in that diner whispered Caldwell so many times I thought we were summoning him like a ghost." Patricia groaned and rubbed her forehead. "Camille." "Look," Camille said gently. "Nobody's saying it's him, but it might be. That's exactly what I don't need." Patricia's voice cracked even though she tried to steady it. "Joseph walking back into this town like he didn't break my life open." Camille tilted her head. "Sweetheart, he didn't break your life. He broke your heart. You built the life." Patricia swallowed. Her throat felt tight again. "I can't go through that again, Cam." "You're not," Camille said firmly. "You're not that girl anymore, and he can't take nothing from you now that you haven't already built yourself." Patricia didn't speak. She wasn't sure she agreed. She wasn't sure she disagreed either. Camille lowered her voice. "Listen, if his company really is sponsoring that fundraiser, then someone in this town talked to him recently, which means he's not just throwing money around. He's connected to something here." She paused, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Maybe even someone—" Patricia stiffened, her heart beating faster. "Cam," she warned. "Hey, I'm not saying he's coming for you. I'm not even saying he knows you're here. I'm just saying, life has a funny way of circling back." Patricia pushed away from the wall. "I need to finish my shift." Camille didn't stop her, but she watched her walk inside with a face that said she knew trouble was coming. Not chaos, not danger, just emotional weight. The kind that sat deep in the bones. Back inside, the diner was quieter. The afternoon lull usually felt peaceful, but today the silence felt too loud. Patricia gathered ketchup bottles to wipe them down, though none of them needed wiping. Her mind paced in circles. She thought back to the last time she saw Joseph, the argument, the disbelief in his eyes when she told him she was pregnant, the way he stepped back like he'd been pushed. She remembered the words she wished she hadn't said and the ones she wished he had. She remembered calling him days later, only to find his number disconnected. She remembered waiting in the hospital alone, praying not to resent the baby she already loved. She remembered everything. The bell above the door jingled again, snapping her back into the present. A woman walked in with 2 small children waving warmly. Patricia greeted them with a smile she had perfected, gracious, steady, practiced. As she took their order, Camille approached with a stack of flyers in hand. "You want to see one?" Camille asked. Patricia looked at the flyers and hesitated. "Is it the fundraiser?" "Yep," Camille said, unfolding one dramatically. "Hot off the press." Patricia braced herself. She wasn't ready, but her fingers reached anyway, taking the paper slowly, like touching something that might burn. The flyer was simple, bright colors, smiling kids, the school's name at the top. She scanned the sections until her eyes landed on the line near the bottom. Sponsored by Caldwell Industries. Her breath shortened again. Caldwell Industries. Not Joseph Caldwell. Not explicitly, but Joseph was the only Caldwell she knew with industries in his life. A memory cut through her. Joseph once telling her he planned to start his own business, talking about wanting more than what Beaumont offered, wanting to build something big enough that he never felt trapped. She didn't know how she remembered such a small detail so clearly after all these years. Camille leaned in. "It's him, Pat. You don't know that," Patricia whispered. "Girl, you do." Patricia stared at the flyer, her pulse flickering beneath her skin like a warning. She hated that part of her chest ached, not because she missed him, she told herself, but because she wasn't prepared to face the man who walked away from her and the child he never cared to meet. The man who made her feel disposable at her most vulnerable. The man who, once upon a time, held her like she mattered. She folded the flyer and handed it back to Camille. "Well?" Camille asked gently. Patricia shook her head. "If he's really coming here, I hope he stays on his side of town." Camille gave her a look full of empathy and unspoken truth. "Life don't really work that way, Pat." Before they could say anything else, the bell jingled again as another customer entered. Patricia slid back into work mode, her shoulders straightening, her voice steadying. But the knot in her chest never loosened. Later, when her shift ended and she picked up Elise from Camille's house, her daughter ran into her arms, laughing as if the world were simple and good. Patricia held her tight, breathing in her warmth. "Mommy, can we get ice cream?" Elise asked, bouncing. "Not tonight, baby," Patricia murmured. "Maybe later this week," Elise pouted. "But Pastor said treat yourself." Patricia cracked a small smile. "He meant in spirit, honey." As they walked home, Elise chattered about coloring pages and church songs, her tiny hand swinging in Patricia's. But Patricia kept glancing at the folded flyer peeking from her apron pocket. Every step reminded her that life was shifting. She didn't know how. She didn't know why. But she felt it. At home, after Elise fell asleep tangled in her blankets, Patricia sat at the table alone, staring at the flyer again under the soft glow of a lamp. Her fingers traced the name. Caldwell Industries, she whispered into the quiet. "Why now?" No answer came, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the steady beat of her own heart, signaling a truth she didn't want to admit. Something was coming, something she wasn't ready for. And the real question settled heavy in her chest. If the past finally came knocking, would she open the door? Joseph Caldwell liked to tell himself he had built the kind of life men dreamed about, the kind people envied from magazine covers and elevator small talk, the kind framed in glass windows 40 stories above Houston, windows that reflected a skyline built by ambition, not accident. But even on the days he convinced everyone else he was thriving, the truth inside those walls stayed stubbornly quiet. Some mornings, he woke before his alarm and lay there staring at the ceiling of his condo, wondering why success felt so much heavier than he imagined it would. This morning was one of those. The city was already humming outside, but his place stayed still, cold, almost too clean. Granite countertops untouched, leather couches barely broken in, art chosen by a designer because he'd said, "Just make it look modern." He sat up slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. His watch glowed on the nightstand, real gold, custom engraved, a gift from his board after a record-breaking quarter. He had smiled in the photos that day, perfectly. Now he couldn't even look at it without feeling something clamp around his chest. He pushed himself out of bed and walked barefoot across the polished floor. His footsteps echoed in a way that reminded him nobody else lived there. No soft chatter, no humming in the kitchen, no child pulling at his shirt, no partner telling him he worked too hard. Just success, hollow and polished like everything around him. He brewed coffee and didn't wait for it to finish before pouring. It tasted bitter, sharper than usual. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was the morning. Maybe it was that familiar ache he only felt when the world slowed down enough for memories to slip through. His phone buzzed on the counter. Emails, reminders, numbers that held no warmth, meetings lined up back to back, a late lunch with investors, a call with a consultant. Nothing on that screen told him why he felt the way he did. Nothing on that screen mentioned the one thing he never talked about. Joseph walked to his office, a room more impressive in square footage than anything else. Awards lined the shelves. A framed article from a business magazine, Joseph Caldwell. From small-town dreamer to industry powerhouse. He had forced a smile for that photo, too, even though the photographer kept saying, "Try to relax, relax." He'd nearly laughed. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop trying to focus. But as the screen loaded, something tugged at him. An old habit, something he rarely allowed himself on weekday mornings. He reached for the bottom drawer and pulled it open. There, tucked in the back under files and polished pens, was a small worn envelope, one he had carried through every move, every new office, every stage of growth. He didn't label it. He didn't need to. Inside was the photo. It had started fading around the edges, but the moment it captured stayed sharp. Patricia laughing, head tilted just slightly, sunlight hitting her cheek. She wore a soft blue top that he remembered choosing with her at a Beaumont strip mall, teasing her that she made everything look better just by wearing it. He held the picture between his fingers, letting the silence settle around him. His shoulders slumped. Patricia. He'd told himself for years that leaving Beaumont had been the right choice, that focusing on his future was the responsible thing, that he wasn't ready for parenthood, that he had to chase opportunity before life pinned him down. Those excuses had grown more polished over time. Just like the condo, just like the suits, just like the smile he wore for cameras. But excuses didn't erase memories. They didn't erase the night she told him she was pregnant, or the fear that swallowed him whole, or the mistake he made when he walked away instead of standing up. He'd buried all that under work, under money, under a schedule packed so tight it left no room for regret. Yet regret still found him, slipping in during long flights, appearing in hotel rooms after wins he couldn't celebrate, echoing in the quiet moments between phone calls. He traced his thumb across Patricia's face in the photo. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, though nobody was there to hear it. The intercom buzzed. His assistant's voice broke through the stillness. "Mr. Caldwell, the team is ready for your 9 o'clock briefing." Joseph blinked hard, sliding the photo back into the envelope. "I'll be there in a moment." He smoothed his tie in the hallway mirror, adjusting the mask of composure he wore so well. The man in the reflection looked powerful, disciplined, sharp. The kind of man who didn't let personal failures haunt him. The kind of man investors trusted. But Joe knew better. He knew that his success stood on a foundation that had cracked long before he ever touched his first million. The walk to the boardroom felt longer than usual. People greeted him with admiration. Firm handshakes, bright smiles, nods that said leader. He responded automatically, though his mind sat somewhere else entirely. Somewhere in Beaumont. Somewhere in the memory of a woman who once looked at him like he was more than potential. He sat at the head of the glossy table, listening as his team reviewed projections and strategies. They spoke in numbers and percentages, in forecasts and targets. He answered questions, offered guidance, played the part he had mastered. But every so often, when his eyes drifted, he caught himself staring through the glass wall at the city below, the cars, the people, the rhythm of a world he had molded himself into. And then he'd wonder why it all felt like the wrong kind of full. When the meeting ended, applause followed him out the door. Another win, another step forward. Another day where nobody saw the fracture beneath the suit. Hours later, after investors left and the conference rooms emptied, Joseph stayed behind. He loosened his tie and sank into his chair, the silence settling again like it had been waiting for him to return. He reached for the envelope once more. His phone buzzed again. Not an email this time, but a text from his business partner. "Colin, dinner tonight?" Celebrating the big numbers. Joseph stared at the screen. He used to love those dinners. The noise, the posturing, the sense of control. Now even the thought exhausted him. He typed back, "Not tonight." After the message sent, he leaned back and closed his eyes. He thought about Patricia's laugh, about how she once believed in him more than he believed in himself, about how quiet she had become in the weeks before he left, not because she stopped caring, but because she saw him slipping away and didn't know how to stop it. And for a moment, His chest tightened with something he didn't name. Regret took many forms. This one felt like a shadow stretching across a life that never truly fit. He opened his eyes again and stared at the ceiling, letting the weight settle. He was a man with degrees, influence, power, but none of it had ever filled the hollow space he'd carried since the day he left Patricia standing on that porch, holding the beginning of a life he didn't have the courage to face. The truth was simple. He had built an empire, but he'd abandoned a home before it ever had the chance to exist. And deep down, in a place he kept hidden even from himself, he wondered if that was the moment everything inside him started drifting. Joseph lowered his head, sighing softly. He didn't know it yet, not fully, but life was already moving toward a truth he could no longer outrun. And in that quiet office high above Houston, holding a fading photo of the woman he left behind, Joseph Caldwell felt something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Lonely, unsteady, human, and nowhere near at peace. The rest of Joseph's workday passed in a blur. Numbers, handshakes, contract reviews. But none of it stuck. His body moved through the motions, but his mind drifted in and out of memories he hadn't invited in years. Every time he blinked, he saw Patricia's face in that old photograph. Every time he tried to focus, something tugged him backward instead of forward. By late afternoon, the office had thinned out. Most of the staff packed up early, eager to escape the Houston traffic. The sky outside shifted into soft gold, casting a warm glow across the glass walls. The city hummed below, full of people heading home to something or someone. Joseph loosened his tie again. He'd done it so many times today it barely stayed knotted, and sank into his leather chair. He rubbed at the tension in his temples and let out a slow breath. He reached for his tablet, intending to check the market reports he'd ignored all morning. But when he unlocked the screen, his thumb hesitated. Instead of tapping the finance folder, he opened the news app he rarely bothered with. Beaumont. He typed the word without thinking. It was muscle memory, some forgotten habit from years ago when he still cared to know what was happening in the town he left behind. The search results loaded instantly. Local updates, church gatherings, school announcements, community fundraisers. He scrolled casually, telling himself he wasn't looking for anything in particular. But he knew better. Some part of him, the part that still remembered the sound of Patricia's laughter riding the summer heat, was searching for something he couldn't name. Then it hit, a small headline near the middle of the page, the school's annual fundraiser. Nothing special, nothing flashy, but the image made Joseph still. He tapped it. The article opened. At first glance, it looked like any community piece, a cheerful group of kids holding handmade posters, teachers smiling, a short write-up about raising money for new classroom supplies. But in the second photo, smaller, tucked halfway down the screen, Joseph saw her, Patricia. She stood near the school steps, holding a clipboard, talking to another adult. She looked older in the way that life ages you, stronger, more grounded, but she was still her, the same warmth in her smile, the same steadiness in her posture. It was like seeing a ghost he'd never stopped thinking about. His breath caught in his throat. He expanded the image with trembling fingers. Patricia's hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her dress was simple, professional. There was something about her expression, tired yet bright, that hit him like a blow. She looked good, not glamorous, not made up, just good, real, beautiful in a way he'd forgotten how to describe. His vision blurred for a moment, not from tears, but from the flood of memory tightening his chest. Then he saw the child, a little girl in front of Patricia, maybe 5 years old, holding a sign with messy crayon letters. Her curls were tied with a yellow bow. Her smile lit up her entire face, and even before his mind fully processed it, something inside him cracked open. There was no denying it. Elise. He didn't know her name yet, not officially, but the resemblance was immediate and inescapable. The girl had Patricia's warmth, but she had his eyes, his exact shade, the kind of detail you couldn't talk your way out of. He stared at the child until his vision swam. A quiet whisper left his mouth before he realized he'd spoken. My God. He set the tablet down carefully, as if it were something fragile. His chest tightened into something sharp and unfamiliar. Regret climbed his throat, settling heavy. He pushed away from the desk, pacing the length of the room, one hand in his hair, the other pressed against his chest. He had imagined this moment before, or something like it, but imagination never hurt like reality. A child, a daughter, his daughter. He had walked away from her before she took her first breath, before she opened her eyes, before she learned to talk or walk or laugh, before she learned the world without him in it. The guilt hit hard and sudden, knocking the air out of him. All the excuses he'd told himself for years, that Patricia would be better off, that he wasn't ready, that he had too much to lose, disintegrated in an instant. He sank into his chair again, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. "Lord," he breathed, voice cracking for the first time in years. He swallowed hard, remembering the young man he had been, panicked, confused, terrified of becoming a father when he didn't feel like he knew how to be one. Terrified he'd ruin his life before it ever started. Terrified that the pressure from people around him was right, that he couldn't handle responsibility, that Patricia would eventually resent him, that he'd fail them both. But fear was a poor reason to abandon something sacred. Fear didn't excuse the silence, the distance, the 5 years that rolled by without so much as a phone call. He reached for the tablet again, staring at the girl in the photo, a tiny handprint on her shirt, a bright smile that seemed to glow right through the screen. His daughter. A light knock broke through the room. His assistant peered in. "Mr. Caldwell, are you all right? You look pale." Joseph straightened quickly, clearing his throat. "I'm fine. I just need a moment." She nodded politely and left. He locked the door behind her. He sat back down and touched the screen again, tracing the outline of the child's face. His voice fell to a whisper. "Are you really mine?" But deep down, he knew the answer. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling until tears burned behind his eyes. He didn't cry, not fully, but the ache trembled there, waiting. What would you do if the life you abandoned was still waiting? He let the question settle. If he stayed where he was, nothing would change. If he hid behind work, excuses would stack like bricks. If he ignored the photo, history would repeat itself, not because he wanted it to, but because avoiding truth was easier than facing it. He exhaled shakily. Patricia had raised that little girl alone. He knew that now. He could see the strength in Patricia's posture, the resilience in her smile, the brightness in the child's eyes. He felt his throat tighten again. He had no right to step into their lives. Not yet. Not without humility, accountability, and truth. But he also knew one thing. He couldn't stay in Houston another day pretending the past didn't exist. He had to go back to Beaumont, whether Patricia wanted to see him or not, whether she slammed the door or stared through him like a stranger, whether she let him speak or turned away. He owed her more than silence. He owed that little girl more than absence. He owed himself the chance to finally confront the truth he spent years avoiding. The tablet dimmed, the photo shrinking back to the article headline. Joseph leaned forward and whispered, not as a businessman, but as a man finally facing the weight of his choices, "I should have been there." And in that quiet confession, he felt something shift inside him. Not forgiveness, not peace, just the beginning of reckoning. Joseph stayed seated for a long time after the article dimmed on his tablet screen, as if moving too quickly might break something fragile inside him. The photo of Patricia and the little girl lingered in his mind long after the device went dark. It was the kind of image that didn't go away just because you looked away from it. It stayed, it settled. It took root. His daughter, a child he had never held, a life he had never touched. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, trying to slow the pounding in his chest. He'd built companies, landed deals, survived rooms full of people waiting for him to fail. He'd faced pressure most men buckled under. But this truth, was the one thing he never prepared for. And now, it was staring him down, refusing to let him walk past it one more time. Joseph rose slowly, pacing back and forth across the office. The city glowed beneath him, headlights weaving through the streets like tiny threads. People heading home, parents picking up kids, families gathering around dinner tables. He wondered if Patricia and her daughter, their daughter, were sitting together right now, maybe sharing leftovers or watching a show, completely unaware that he was standing 40 stories above Houston, facing the consequences of a decision he made years ago. He grabbed his suit jacket from the chair and slipped it on. He wasn't heading out yet, he just needed the grounding weight of it. Something about the fabric pressing against him kept his hands from shaking. He paused at the window. He saw his reflection, older, sharper, hardened in ways he didn't fully understand. Yet beneath all of that, he saw something else, a flicker of the young man who once stood outside Patricia's apartment, laughing at the future he thought he'd figured out. A boy pretending to be a man. A boy who ran because fear felt easier than accountability. Fear wasn't easier now, not with the truth staring back at him. He reached again for the tablet. Opening the article didn't get easier the second time. If anything, his breath caught harder when he saw the child's face again. Her smile, her curls, her tiny hand gripping the handmade poster. Joseph whispered, "I should have been there," even though he'd already said it. Saying it again made it more real, more condemning, more necessary. His phone buzzed on the desk, a call from Colin, probably checking in about dinner. Joseph let it ring, unable to deal with anything unrelated to this moment. When it stopped, another message appeared. "Colin, big deal tomorrow. We should prep tonight." Joseph stared at the screen for a long beat, then typed back, "I can't tonight." Something important came up. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. For once, work wasn't the priority. He set the phone aside and walked back toward his desk, grabbing his car keys. He didn't quite know what he planned to do, but movement felt better than stillness. Doing something, anything, felt better than drowning in the guilt that pressed on him like a weight. He turned off the lights in his office, locked the door, and walked down the hallway. His footsteps sounded heavier than usual, like the floor itself understood he wasn't the same man who walked in that morning. In the parking garage, he sat inside his car for a moment before starting the engine. His grip tightened around the steering wheel. He didn't know what he would say to Patricia. He didn't know how she would react. He didn't know if she'd listen or if she'd slam the door in his face. But he knew he had to go home. Not his Houston home. Not the high-rise, not the clean lines, not the marble countertops. He meant Beaumont, the place he'd spent years avoiding, the place holding the answers he couldn't ignore anymore. He took a long breath and started the engine. Traffic crawled as he merged onto the highway, but he barely noticed. His mind replayed moments he'd buried. Patricia smiling at him during a picnic, her hands squeezing his at the movies, her voice cracking the night she told him she was pregnant, his own panic choking his judgment. He'd avoided looking back for years. Now he couldn't look anywhere else. Halfway down the interstate, a light rain began to fall. Not a storm, just gentle drops tapping the windshield. The kind of rain that made the world look softer than it felt. Joseph didn't turn on the radio. The silence kept him honest. After an hour, he pulled into a rest stop and cut the engine. He leaned his head back and exhaled deeply. His pulse was steadying now, but his thoughts were sharper. He took out his phone again. No new messages, no questions from anyone except the unspoken ones simmering in his own mind. What would Patricia say if she saw him? What would the little girl, his daughter, think of him? What right did he have to disturb their lives now? He answered himself softly. None. Not until I face what I did. He rested his hands on the steering wheel, letting the thoughts settle. A man could hide behind accomplishments all he wanted, but eventually life found a way to pull the truth into the light. Joseph wasn't sure what redemption looked like for someone like him, but he knew it didn't start with staying in Houston. He restarted the car. As he continued toward Beaumont, storefronts and small towns blurred past. Memories flashed faster now. Him and Patricia sitting in his old car, laughing about how the AC never worked, the way she'd lean over and turn the radio to her favorite gospel station on Sundays, the way she'd hold his hand without hesitation. He swallowed the ache rising in his throat. Stepping away had felt justified back then. He convinced himself leaving was protecting her from the disappointment of who he thought he'd become. It took years to understand the truth. He hadn't protected her from anything. He'd only proven he wasn't the man she believed him to be. As Beaumont's exit sign approached, his stomach tightened. The lights got fewer, the roads quieter, the air somehow thicker with memory. He wasn't heading to Patricia's door tonight. He knew better than to show up unannounced at night with years of silence trailing behind him. But he needed to see something familiar, something real, something that tied him back to the man he once was. He pulled into a small hotel on the edge of town, one he'd passed 1,000 times growing up but never stayed in. The parking lot was half lit, the sign flickering slightly. Inside the room, he sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees. He opened his wallet and pulled out the old photo he always kept hidden behind cards and receipts. Patricia, younger, smiling, sunlight catching the curve of her cheek. He held the photo gently, like it might dissolve under too much pressure. The guilt didn't go away. but underneath it something else stirred, a fragile thread of resolve. He whispered into the dim room, "I'm not running anymore." He let the silence absorb the promise, then exhaled slowly. Life wasn't offering him an easy path. It wasn't offering forgiveness or closure or certainty, but it was offering him a chance, one he'd already wasted once. Tomorrow, he'd start facing what he'd left behind. Tomorrow, he'd seek the truth of who his daughter was. Tomorrow, he'd confront Patricia, not expecting grace, but offering honesty. He lay back on the bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Is it courage to go back, or fear of living with regret? Joseph didn't sleep much that night, even though exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. The hotel bed was comfortable, sure, but comfort didn't mean peace. Not for him, not anymore. When the sun crept through the thin Beaumont curtains, he sat up with a heaviness he hadn't felt in years, something between dread and longing, stitched together by the weight of everything he'd left undone. He showered, shaved, dressed in a simple button-down instead of his usual tailored armor. He looked at himself in the mirror, trying to recognize the man staring back. The suit and confidence version of Joseph Caldwell didn't show up today. The one standing here now. He wasn't running meetings or closing deals. He was a man getting ready to face a truth he abandoned. His stomach tightened. He didn't plan to see Patricia today. He had rehearsed a slow approach. Find the right time, the right place, maybe talk to someone in town first. But life doesn't always wait on timing. Sometimes it just happens. And sometimes it happens fast. He stepped out into the Beaumont heat, that familiar Gulf humidity wrapping around him like the town knew exactly who he was and wasn't sure it wanted him back. He got in his rental car and drove without direction at first, passing streets he knew well. The high school, the old laundromat, the little park where he and Patricia once sat on swings, laughing too loudly for grown folks but not caring one bit. He swallowed the memory. Eventually, hunger nudged him toward the only diner in town that ever seemed to stay exactly the same. Neon sign humming, screen door that squeaked, the kind of place where people didn't just eat, they caught up, fussed, prayed, argued, forgave. It was the heartbeat of the neighborhood. He parked, telling himself he'd grab a quiet breakfast and keep his head down. But the moment he stepped inside, quiet wasn't an option. Patricia stood at the counter pouring coffee into a mug. At first, she didn't notice him. She was focused on her work, steady hands, soft expression, that familiar grace he remembered even after all these years. Her hair was tied back neatly, her apron snug around her waist. She looked the same and different at the same time, older, stronger, standing taller in a way that told him she had stretched herself through the hard seasons and come out standing. His breath left him. He hadn't imagined her. He hadn't exaggerated her beauty with memory. She was real, right here. And he felt every regret he'd ever carried crash into him all at once. His foot shifted, and the sound must have caught her attention because she turned. Their eyes met. Her expression froze. The coffee pot in her hand trembled so slightly most folks wouldn't notice, but Joseph did. He noticed everything about her in that fragile second. Patricia's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her brows pulled together in a mix of confusion, shock, and something deeper, something she'd never let him name. Joseph opened his mouth, but words tangled in his throat. The diner grew strangely quiet, as if Beaumont itself took a breath. Finally, Patricia spoke. Just one word, soft but razor-edged. Joseph? His name on her tongue hit him harder than he expected. He swallowed, his voice low. Hello, Patricia. She blinked once, twice. Her eyes sharpened with the weight of 5 years of hurt she had tucked neatly behind her ribs. What are you doing here? She asked. The question wasn't angry. It was wounded, careful, guarded. He paused, glancing around. A couple at a nearby table pretended not to stare. I came in for breakfast, he said quietly. Didn't know you worked here. Her jaw tightened. People change, Joseph. Life changes, I know. His voice cracked slightly. I'm sorry if this is uncomfortable. That word, sorry, seemed to land somewhere between them, but not gently. Patricia set the coffee pot down carefully, as if bracing herself. Uncomfortable? She repeated, keeping her voice steady. You left me pregnant and disappeared. I'd say that sits a little past uncomfortable. Her tone wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was honest, the kind of honesty she'd held back for years. A middle-aged couple at the counter exchanged a glance but stayed quiet. This wasn't small gossip. This was something heavier. Joseph stepped closer, but not too close, not enough to crowd her. "Patricia," he said softly, "you're right. You're completely right. And I know I don't have any right to expect you to even talk to me, but I needed to say something." "Oh, now you need to say something?" She let out a breath, half laugh, half disbelief. "Joseph, you didn't need to say a word to me for 5 years. You made that choice." He felt the sting, but he didn't look away. "You told me you were pregnant," he said quietly, "and I was scared. I was stupid. I convinced myself leaving was easier than facing it." She shook her head slowly, eyes sharpening. "It wasn't easier for me." Silence tightened the room again. He nodded. I know that now." Patricia crossed her arms, her voice dropping into something softer but cracked around the edges. "Why are you really here? Beaumont isn't exactly on your travel route." His chest tightened. "I saw the fundraiser article." Her breath hitched, her shoulders stiffened. "Oh," she whispered, "I saw the little girl." His voice faltered. "I saw her face." Patricia didn't move at first. Then her eyes closed for a moment, just long enough to steady herself. "I'm not trying to take anything," he said. She looks—" "Don't say it," Patricia warned. He swallowed. "Like me." Patricia's jaw clenched so tightly he saw the tremor in her cheek. "You walked away before you even gave her a chance to exist in your world. Do not claim her with your eyes now." Joseph nodded, accepting the blow even though it hurt more than anything he'd felt in years. "You're right," he whispered. "You're right to feel that way." Her breath shook, barely noticeable except to someone who once knew her heart. She looked at him like she was searching for the man she used to love but finding someone else standing in his place. "You have no right to talk about her," she said quietly. "None. Is she—" Joseph stopped, clearing his throat. "Is she okay?" Patricia hesitated, then answered softly, "She's wonderful. She's smart, she's funny, she's stubborn. She's everything a 5-year-old should be." A soft smile tugged at him before he could stop it. "Good," he said quietly. "That's good." Patricia's expression shifted, hurt mixing with something unexpectedly vulnerable. "She doesn't know you exist." His chest tightened. "I know, and that's on me." Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something deeper than anger, something closer to grief. He reached out instinctively, not to touch her, but to reach toward the distance between them. "Patricia, I never stopped caring about you. I just stopped believing I was worthy of—" She held up a hand. "Don't. Not here. Not like this." A waitress, unnamed, as rules demanded, peeked from the back room, sensing the tension. But Patricia gestured that she was fine. Another customer entered, glancing between them curiously. The moment was losing its privacy. "Hungry, take a seat. Camille will take your order." Patricia turned away, lifting the coffee pot again even though she didn't need to. "If you're—" He nodded because there was nothing else to do. His throat felt tight. "Thank you," he murmured. She didn't respond. He sat at a booth near the window, hands folded, heart pounding in a way no board meeting had ever triggered. Across the room, Patricia kept working, chin high, eyes focused, breath steady. But every now and then she glanced his way, not out of longing, not out of forgiveness, out of disbelief that the past had finally walked through her door. And Joseph, he watched her with quiet devastation. He had finally come home, but he had no idea how to earn his way back into the life he abandoned. The bell above the diner door jingled as a new customer walked in, but Patricia barely registered the sound. Her focus kept drifting back to the booth where Joseph sat staring at nothing, hands clasped together like he was afraid they'd shake if he let go. She moved through the diner on instinct, refilling mugs, wiping counters, offering tired smiles, but her mind kept replaying every second of what had just happened. His voice, his face, his apology. The shock of seeing him walk in like Beaumont had never broken him or her. Every time she looked at him, a wave of heat rolled through her chest, not the warm kind, the burning kind. Camille slipped beside her near the coffee machine. "Girl, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Patricia pressed her lips together, keeping her tone low. "I saw something worse." Camille followed her gaze and froze. "Is that who I think it is?" Patricia nodded once. Camille's eyebrows shot up to the ceiling. "Joseph, Joseph, Joseph, Lord have mercy. Patricia didn't want to answer, didn't want to feel anything, didn't want to be watched by half the diner while her past sat 20 feet away pretending to breathe normally. She walked back to the counter, needing to move, needing something to steady her hands. Her palm brushed the small framed photo sitting near the register, her and Elise at the church picnic last summer. Elise grinning with the snow cone, Patricia's arm wrapped tight around her. She turned the frame slightly, angling it away from the booth where Joseph sat. Something about him seeing it earlier made her feel exposed in a way she wasn't prepared for. Behind her, Camille muttered, "You want me to handle him? I can tell him to take his fancy shoes and leave." "No," Patricia whispered. "Let him finish his meal. I'm not giving Beaumont something else to talk about." Camille gave her a side eye. "Baby, Beaumont gon' talk regardless." Patricia inhaled slowly. "Then I'm not making it louder." And she wasn't. Not today. Not when Elise would be home later asking how her day went, and Patricia would have to smile like her world hadn't tilted before lunchtime. Joseph sat stiffly in the booth, staring out the window at the familiar Beaumont Street. Cars rolled by slowly. A man on a bicycle waved at someone across the road. A group of teenagers crossed toward the gas station. Ordinary life. But nothing felt ordinary inside him. When Camille approached, he straightened. She crossed her arms, giving him a look that carried all the protective judgment of a friend who knew Patricia's pain firsthand. "What you want to eat?" she asked flatly. He swallowed. "Just coffee, please." She nodded, scribbling the order. "She ain't talking to you anymore today, so don't try." He nodded again. He deserved that. Camille left, and the silence returned, not around him but inside him. He could still hear Patricia's voice shaking when she'd said, "She doesn't know you exist." He closed his eyes, leaning back in the booth. His daughter. He had a daughter. A living, breathing little girl who didn't even know he was on the same planet. A child who smiled like sunlight, who looked like him, who belonged to Patricia, the woman he once loved so deeply it scared him into running. And Patricia had raised her alone. He rubbed his forehead with his fingertips, a deep shame settling inside his chest. He tried to imagine Patricia pregnant and alone. Tried to imagine her holding their daughter for the first time. Waiting for a man who never came. He saw it all in flashes, each one cutting deeper than the last. The diner clatter grew louder suddenly. Someone laughing, a fork hitting a plate, but it all sounded far away. He felt like he was underwater. His thoughts spiraled, quietly, intensely, until Camille returned with his coffee. She set it down harder than necessary. "You heard her," she said bluntly. "You know that, right?" He nodded. "You heard her when she needed you most." He nodded again. Camille leaned closer, lowering her voice. "And let me tell you something. She did everything for that little girl. No man helped. No child support, no calls, nothing. Patricia did the work, every day, every night. She didn't break even when she wanted to." Joseph swallowed hard. "I know. I see that now. Do you?" Camille challenged. "Because she can't afford another heartbreak from you." Her words sank into him, heavy and deserved. "I'm not here to hurt her," he whispered. "Well, you already did." She straightened. "Now drink your coffee and decide what kind of man you're going to be next." She walked away, leaving him with a truth that tasted stronger than the coffee she'd poured. Across the diner, Patricia tried to breathe evenly, but every inhale felt shaky. Every exhale felt trapped. She didn't want to care that Joseph looked lost in that booth. She didn't want to care that he looked older, tired, almost broken. She didn't want to care that hearing him say sorry stirred something messy inside her chest. But caring was a habit she never fully unlearned. She pressed her palms on the counter. "Stay focused," she told herself. "Work. Just work." Yet her mind wouldn't hush. He saw Elise. He saw her face. He recognized her smile. He knew. And Patricia felt something unravel inside her. Not hope, not yet. More like the fear that change was coming whether she wanted it or not. Her voice caught when she whispered to Camille, "What am I supposed to do?" Camille squeezed her shoulder. "Whatever protects you and that little girl." "Start there." Patricia nodded, though her heart trembled. A few minutes later, Joseph stood up. His untouched coffee sat cooling on the table. He walked toward the counter slowly, cautiously, like a man afraid of spooking a wild thing. Patricia didn't look up right away. "Thank you for the coffee," he said softly. She nodded without meeting his eyes. He hesitated, then added, "I'm staying in Beaumont for a bit." Her breath stopped. He continued, voice low, quiet enough that only she could hear, "I want to make things right." Patricia's head lifted sharply. Her eyes flashed with a mix of anger, shock, and something she tried to swallow back. "You can't fix 5 years with a weekend," she said. "I know," Joseph replied, "but I can start." He reached for his wallet, but Patricia pushed the receipt aside. "Leave it," she said coldly. "We're not doing the polite thing today." He nodded once, swallowing the sting. "I'll see you around," he whispered. "Don't count on it." He stepped back, opened the door, and walked out into the Beaumont sunlight, the bell above the diner chiming faintly behind him. Patricia watched him leave. She pressed both hands against the counter to steady herself. Her heart felt bruised, her thoughts ached, her knees wobbled, but above all that, one truth burned its way to the surface. He wasn't gone this time, and that terrified her more than when he left. Some reunions don't heal. They shake the ground beneath your feet until you have to choose, stand firm or run. And Patricia, she didn't know which one she was ready to do. The sun dipped low over Beaumont, painting the sky in soft streaks of orange and pink, but Patricia didn't notice the beauty of it. Not tonight. She sat at her kitchen table long after her shift ended, after picking up Elise from Camille's place, after helping her brush her teeth and say her bedtime prayer. Now the house was quiet, too quiet, and quiet had a way of letting hard truths settle. Her fingers trembled slightly as she sifted through a stack of bills, Elise's school papers, and a blank envelope she'd been avoiding for months. She didn't know why she pulled it out tonight. Maybe because seeing Joseph again cracked open something she spent 5 years sealing shut. She pressed her palm over her chest, whispering to herself, "Lord, what am I supposed to do now?" The room didn't answer, but her heart did, with a heavy pulsing ache that reminded her of everything she'd carried alone. Across town, Joseph sat in his hotel room staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Beaumont felt smaller than he remembered, like the walls of the town leaned closer the longer he stayed. He had spent the entire evening thinking about Patricia, about Elise, about all the missing years. He turned on his side, his breath unsteady. The little girl's face kept appearing in his mind, her smile, her curls, her eyes, his eyes. He hadn't earned the right to call himself her father, but biology didn't care about choices. Biology didn't care about fear. Responsibility didn't vanish just because he ran from it, and now he felt every mile of the distance he'd created. He scrubbed a hand over his face. "This is my fault," he whispered. "All of it." The words hung in the room like a confession he should have spoken years ago. The next morning came heavy for both of them. Patricia stood in front of the bathroom mirror, fixing her hair while Elise hummed from the living room. Her reflection looked the same as always, but her eyes, they were tired, worried, pulled between past and present like a rope in a tug of war. She knew one thing, though. She couldn't let her emotions guide her decisions. Elise's future was at stake. As much as she hated the idea, she needed help. Real help. Not excuses or apologies or old promises Joseph never kept. Camille stopped by to drop off a container of shrimp etouffee and took one look at Patricia's face before crossing her arms. "You didn't sleep?" "No," Patricia admitted. "I couldn't. You thinking about him?" She nodded. "Girl," Camille sighed, pulling out a chair. "I know your heart is a strong one, but strength don't mean carrying everything alone forever." Patricia's voice softened. "I don't want his money. I know you don't. But Elise deserves support. She deserves security. And you deserve not to be exhausted every month trying to make ends meet." Patricia looked down at her hands, calloused, tired, steady. "It feels ugly to file something like this. Like I'm dragging our business through the mud." "You didn't make the mud," Camille replied gently. He did. The truth sat heavy but honest, and Patricia felt something shift, something like resolve. She stood slowly, walked to her purse, and pulled out the blank envelope she'd been avoiding. She slid it into her bag. "I'm gonna go to the courthouse today," she said softly. "I'll watch Elise," Camille replied without hesitation. "Go do what you gotta do." The Jefferson County Courthouse in Beaumont still held that old brick charm. weathered but standing strong. Patricia felt the same way about herself most days. She stepped inside, took a breath, and approached the counter. A clerk, unnamed, as her world required, smiled kindly. "How can I help you?" Patricia steadied her voice. "I need to file for paternity and child support." The clerk nodded, calmly guiding her through the paperwork. No judgment, no pity, just simple humanity, which was enough to keep Patricia from crying. She handed over the forms, heart thumping hard. When she walked out of the courthouse, she didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vengeful. She felt responsible, like she had done what needed to be done, not for herself, but for Elise. And deep down, Patricia knew something else. Filing this case meant Joseph would have to face the truth formally, not just emotionally. The law would put weight behind Elise's name. There was no running from that. Meanwhile, in Houston, Joseph stood outside an upscale restaurant waiting for his business partner, Colin. He checked his watch, exhaled, and reminded himself he needed to keep his composure. Colin walked up, straightening his blazer. "Big day," he said. "You ready to finalize the expansion?" Joseph hesitated. "Actually, Colin, there's something I need to tell you." Before he could speak, a stranger approached him with a manila envelope. "Are you Joseph Caldwell?" Joseph nodded. The man handed him the envelope. "You've been served." Joseph froze as the man walked away. Colin blinked. "Served? For what?" Joseph slowly opened the envelope. His stomach dropped. Inside was the official court summons, paternity, child support, DNA testing. He closed his eyes. It's Patricia." Colin looked stunned. "Patricia? From Beaumont? Joseph, what did you do?" Joseph sat heavily on the nearest bench, the weight of the world pressing on him. "I walked away," he whispered. "And now I have a daughter I've never met." Colin's eyes widened. "This could ruin your reputation. Investors don't like scandal. We need to settle quietly. Pay her off before this gets public." Joseph shook his head, firm and steady. "No. Joseph, be smart." "No," he repeated louder. "I'm done thinking about image first. I'm done hiding behind money. This isn't a business problem. It's my responsibility." Colin stared at him like he didn't recognize the man beside him. Joseph pocketed the papers and stood tall. "Patricia deserves honesty. Elise deserves a father. I'm not running from this." For the first time in years, Joseph felt something like clarity. Not peace, not forgiveness, but direction. Colin sighed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Joseph gave a soft, tired smile. "Some things are supposed to be hard." He walked away before Colin could argue, the weight of the envelope grounding him with every step. "When truth calls your name, will you answer?" Joseph finally had. Now he just had to live with whatever came next. The morning of the DNA test felt heavier than any morning Patricia could remember. Even the Beaumont air, thick, warm, already buzzing with cicadas though the sun wasn't fully up, seemed to press on her skin like it knew what the day held. She tried to move normally, tried to tie Elise's shoes with the same gentle rhythm as always, tried to fold her daughter's lunch the way she always did. But her fingers were slower, her breath shorter, her thoughts louder. Elise noticed. Children always do. "Mommy, are you okay?" she asked softly, touching Patricia's arm. Patricia gave a small smile she didn't quite feel. "I'm all right, baby. Just thinking about some grown-up things. Boring?" Patricia let out a light laugh. "Very." Elise accepted that answer more easily than Patricia accepted the truth inside her own chest. She took Elise to school with a hug that lasted a heartbeat too long, and as she walked back toward her car, she whispered a quiet prayer, the kind spoken not from ritual but from need. "God, stay close today." The clinic sat 20 minutes across town. A simple building, beige siding, old metal benches out front, a sliding glass door that whined as it opened. Nothing dramatic, nothing special, just a place where truth was measured in swabs and paperwork. Patricia paused at the entrance. Her hands were cold. Her stomach felt hollow. "You can do this," she told herself. "You've already done harder things." Inside, the waiting room hummed with low conversation, a mother filling out forms, an older man flipping through yesterday's paper, a soft gospel song playing from a small wall radio. And then Patricia saw him. Joseph was already there, sitting in a corner chair, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tight. He'd chosen a plain shirt again, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed success. His eyes were focused on the floor. like he'd been staring at the same tile for 20 minutes trying to find answers it didn't have. Patricia's breath hitched. He looked up the moment he sensed her presence, slowly, cautiously, and for a second her eyes held, not in anger, not in longing, something quieter, something raw, something that hurt to name. He stood. Patricia. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it all morning. She nodded, keeping her distance. Joseph. There were no more words waiting on her tongue, none she trusted herself to speak without shaking. Thank you for coming, he said softly. Her lips tightened. I didn't come for you. He dropped his gaze and nodded. He deserved that. The nurse called them after a few minutes. Caldwell? We're ready for you both. Patricia followed, her step steady even though she felt every emotion she'd been running from these past days pressing against her ribs. Joseph walked beside her, but not too close. There was space, physical, emotional, necessary. Inside the small clinic room, the nurse gave instructions with practiced calm. We'll swab both of you, then we'll submit the samples. Results typically come back in a few days. Patricia nodded. Joseph didn't. He seemed frozen until the nurse repeated herself. Yes, he finally whispered. Okay. Patricia sat first. The nurse swabbed the inside of her cheek gently, placed the sample in a sealed tube, labeled it carefully. Patricia watched the nurse's hands instead of thinking too deeply. Then Joseph sat in the same chair. She didn't look at him, not until she heard the slight tremble in his breathing. When he opened his mouth for the swab, his hand moved to steady his thigh, as though he needed something to hold on to. The nurse finished quickly, politely. That's it for today. You're both free to go. Patricia nodded again and stood. But Joseph stayed seated for a moment, elbows on his knees, hands clasped the same way he had in the waiting room. Finally, he stood up too. In the hallway, Patricia adjusted her purse strap and moved toward the exit. Then his voice came, soft and apologetic. Patricia, can we talk for a minute? She closed her eyes briefly. She didn't want to talk. She didn't want to feel anything. But she turned anyway, slowly, because avoiding him didn't stop the past from breathing down her neck. What do you want to say? She asked. He swallowed hard. I know the test will confirm it. I'm not doubting that. I know she's mine. The hallway seemed to quiet around them, like even the building paused to listen. And, Patricia asked, arms crossing over her chest. I want to say I'm sorry again. Not because a court made me come here. Not because this is official now. I'm sorry because I should have been here 5 years ago. I should have been in that hospital. I should have... Patricia cut him off softly. You weren't... The words hung between them. Not cruelly, not dramatically, but plainly. Truth didn't need volume to hit hard. Joseph nodded slowly. I know. And I can't fix the past. I can't give you back the years you carried everything alone. But I want to try to be better now. Not just because the law says so. Because I should have been better from the start. Patricia's throat tightened, not from forgiveness, but from the sting of hearing the apology she once begged the universe for. Trying now doesn't erase anything, she whispered. I know, he said again, soft, steady. They stood there in the silence that followed, breathing the same air but not quite in the same world. Finally, Patricia said, I'm leaving. He nodded again. Okay. She walked past him, out the sliding doors, into the Beaumont sunlight that felt far too bright for the heaviness she carried. She reached her car and placed her hand on the roof, taking a long breath before getting in. When she looked back at the clinic doors, Joseph was still standing there, watching her leave with a look so full of regret it almost didn't seem real. Patricia went home and made lunch for Elise, sitting beside her daughter while she talked about school with all the excitement only a 5-year-old could manage. Patricia tried to smile, tried to listen, tried to keep her mind from drifting back to the clinic, the swabs, the way Joseph looked at her like he finally understood the years she had endured. But every quiet moment reminded her that a storm was building, one she'd chosen by filing the case, one she needed to weather for Elise's sake. She wasn't afraid of the truth. She was afraid of the change it demanded. Joseph spent the rest of the day in his hotel room pacing. Every step felt heavy. Every thought tangled inside itself. He replayed Patricia's voice, her posture, her eyes, the strength in them, the pain behind them. He wanted to fix something he couldn't touch. For the first time in his adult life, all the money in the world couldn't buy him peace, couldn't undo anything, couldn't lift the weight, The only thing ahead of him now was a courtroom, and the truth waiting inside it. When two broken histories walk into the same room, which truth will rise first, the one that hurt them or the one that might heal them? The morning of the hearing arrived with a kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the world was inhaling and holding its breath. Beaumont's sky was gray, not stormy but expectant, and the air outside Patricia's home sat thick with the weight of unfinished truths. She stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the front of her blouse for the third time. She wasn't dressing to impress, she was dressing to be steady, to be the version of herself who had carried Elise through every hard moment, every bill, every night of fear and perseverance. She tied her hair back with slow, deliberate movements, telling herself not to cry before the day even began. Elise watched her from the doorway, holding a little stuffed bear by the arm. "Are we going to the doctor again?" she asked softly. Patricia knelt, brushing her daughter's cheek. "No, baby. Today Mommy has to go somewhere important. You're staying with Camille." "Is it scary?" Patricia hesitated. Children always tasted the truth in the air. "It's something I have to be brave for." Elise nodded with a seriousness only young children get right. "I'll be brave too." Patricia hugged her tight. Across town, Joseph woke before sunrise. He didn't bother trying to push the exhaustion from his eyes or the ache from his chest. Today wasn't a day for pretending. He put on a simple suit, not the expensive ones he wore in boardrooms, but something understated, something that didn't look like arrogance or armor. His reflection looked older than the man who left Beaumont all those years ago. He wasn't sure when that happened, but the truth lived in the lines around his eyes and the heaviness in his shoulders. He wanted to take back a mistake the world had already recorded, and the hardest part was knowing that whatever happened next, he had to face it head on. He left early, parking outside the courthouse long before he needed to. He sat in the car, hands on the wheel, breathing slowly. The building ahead of him wasn't intimidating in size, but the meaning behind those walls, the consequences waiting, made his heart beat hard. This was the day he had to face everything, and he wasn't sure if he feared losing or feared deserving to. The Jefferson County Courthouse buzzed softly with weekday movement. Attorneys walked with clipboards tucked under their arms. Older couples sat on benches whispering. Papers shuffled. Doors clicked. But inside courtroom 2, time felt slower. Patricia sat at the plaintiff's table beside the legal aid attorney who had been assigned to her. She tried to look straight ahead, but her gaze drifted, uninvited, toward the door Joseph would walk through. When he finally entered, she inhaled sharply. Joseph didn't look confident. He didn't look rehearsed. He looked humbled, like a man who had run out of lies to tell himself. He took a seat at the defendant's table beside his own attorney, but his eyes found Patricia's almost immediately. A silent moment passed. Not forgiveness, not connection, just recognition of everything that brought them here. The clerk called the room to order, and then, as if the universe had planned the timing itself, Judge Reese entered, tall, composed, carrying a calm authority that made the room shift. He took his seat and surveyed both parties with a stern but compassionate gaze. "Let's begin." The attorney representing Patricia spoke first, outlining the case with clean, unemotional facts. Dates, details, the confirmed DNA results, the years of absence, the request for child support and back pay. Each fact was a quiet blow to Joseph's chest. Patricia kept her eyes forward, hands clasped tight in her lap. When she was called to testify, she stood slowly, steady but human. She took the stand, and the room softened as she began speaking in a voice that wavered only at the edges. She described the beginning, the love, the hope, the uncertainty. She described the shock of her pregnancy. She described the night Joseph left and never came back. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried a weight that wrapped around every corner of the room. She spoke about Elise, her joy, her stubborn curls, the way she danced on Sunday mornings. "She's bright," Patricia said softly. "She's full of life, and she deserves to know where she came from." Joseph bowed his head. Patricia finished. "I did not come here today to punish him. I came because our daughter deserves stability, and because the truth needs to be spoken out loud." When she returned to her seat, her knees trembled just slightly. Joseph watched her sit, feeling something break open inside him. Then it was his turn. His attorney began to speak, but Joseph lifted a hand, asking quietly, "May I say something, Your Honor?" Judge Reese studied him. "You may." Joseph stood slowly. The room stilled. Even the hallway outside seemed to quiet. He cleared his throat. I'm not here to deny anything. Patricia told the truth. All of it. I left. I ran. I failed. Patricia's eyes widened faintly. Joseph's voice thickened. I was 20-something and scared out of my mind. I told myself lies to make leaving easier. That maybe the child wasn't mine. That I needed to protect my future. That Patricia would be fine without me. He shook his head. Those were excuses. Cowardly ones. The courtroom listened without judgment, but the air around him felt heavy. I didn't just abandon Patricia, he continued softly. I abandoned my daughter. I abandoned the chance to be a man she could be proud of. I can't take back the years she grew up without me, but I can take responsibility now. For the first time in his adult life, Joseph's voice cracked openly. No boardroom could have prepared him for this. Patricia watched him, her expression unreadable, but her eyes softer now, touched by the raw truth spilling out. Judge Reese leaned forward, hands folded. Mr. Caldwell, you speak of truth today, but let me tell you something you may not know. Joseph blinked. The judge's voice dropped into something deeper, personal. I knew Patricia's situation years ago. A ripple went through the courtroom. I saw her come into church pregnant and alone, he continued. I watched her raise that child with a strength that humbled our whole congregation. I heard the whispers about the father who'd left. Patricia's breath caught. Joseph froze. And let me be clear, Judge Reese said, eyes locked onto Joseph. I knew the father's name. I recognized it the moment this case assignment crossed my desk. Joseph's chest tightened. You knew? I knew your truth before you admitted it out loud, the judge said, and I wondered if you'd ever come back to face it. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. Then Judge Reese delivered the ruling, firm but fair. The court recognizes the DNA results confirming Mr. Caldwell as a biological father. Effective immediately, child support is granted with back pay calculated from the child's birth. Additionally, I strongly recommend Mr. Caldwell pursue meaningful involvement in his daughter's life, not as a financial obligation but as a moral one. He paused, eyes softening just slightly. A child does not need a perfect father. She needs a present one. Patricia exhaled shakily. Joseph wiped his eyes, and somewhere in that quiet courtroom something shifted between them, not healed, not repaired, but opened. A door once closed, now cracked by the force of truth. Judge Reese tapped his gavel once. Court is adjourned. He kept his voice low. Thank you for telling your story. She hesitated, then nodded. Thank you for telling yours. For the first time since their reunion, they looked at each other not as ex-lovers, not as strangers, not as enemies, but as two people standing at the edge of change. When truth finally walks into the light, the question isn't whether it hurts. The question is whether you let it shape you. The hallway outside courtroom 2 was never meant to hold the kind of silence that followed Patricia and Joseph. People passed them, lawyers with stacks of papers, a couple discussing a traffic citation, a man pacing on the phone. But it all felt muted, like the world had turned its volume down to let them hear their own hearts. Patricia stood with one hand on Elise's backpack. She'd picked it up from Camille on the way out, and breathed slowly, trying to steady the combination of relief, ache, and exhaustion running through her body. Her throat still felt tight from testifying, and her palms carried the faint tremble she'd hidden from the courtroom. Joseph lingered a few steps away, not in her space, not pulling at her attention, but close enough to show he wasn't going to rush away this time. He stared at the floor for a moment before he looked up, and when his eyes met hers, they didn't carry the old charm he once used so easily. They carried weight, humility, a kind of quiet reckoning. Patricia, his voice was rough, like he'd been speaking through gravel. I know nothing I said today can undo what I did. I just wanted you to know. I meant every word. She studied him, not angrily, not forgivingly, just honestly. I heard you, she said softly. A simple statement, but it landed with meaning neither of them missed. He nodded, almost relieved she hadn't turned away. I don't expect you to trust me, or even like me. His breath wavered. I want to try, for Elise. Her fingers tightened around the strap of the backpack. It's not about liking you, she said, voice quiet but firm. It's about stability. It's about her having what she deserved from the start. I know, he whispered. I know. For a moment they stood in a space that wasn't anger anymore, but it wasn't forgiveness either. It was something in between, something raw and real. The door behind them opened, and Judge Reese stepped into the hallway, walking toward his chambers. He passed them only briefly, but he offered Patricia a small nod of acknowledgement, one of respect, before giving Joseph a steady, almost fatherly look. Joseph lowered his eyes, humbled once more, and then the judge continued on, leaving behind a quiet reminder that some truths were meant to be faced, not fled. Later that afternoon, Joseph drove back to Houston with the courthouse still lingering in his mind like a shadow that refused to move. He didn't turn on the radio, didn't take calls, didn't think about contracts or deals or the pending expansion his partner Colin kept pushing. Instead, he replayed every moment of the hearing, Patricia's voice cracking when she spoke about Elise's first steps, Judge Reese's steady words, the weight of his own confession filling the room. For years he'd convinced himself the past was a closed door, but it had never been closed, not really. It had just been ignored. Ignored until today, when life grabbed him by the collar and said, "Now." Driving into the city, Joseph felt the familiar skyline rise around him, all glass and ambition, but for the first time it didn't feel like home. It felt like a monument to everything he'd built on shaky ground. Inside his condo, the silence hit harder than usual. He placed his keys on the counter and leaned forward, bracing both hands on the cool stone surface. His reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator looked worn, almost unrecognizable. "This is my fault," he whispered into the empty room. "All of it." He pushed off the counter and walked to the drawer where he kept the old photograph, the one he had held so many nights when guilt crept into the edges of his success, the one he told himself he kept for closure, though he'd never done the work to earn any. He took it out gently, Patricia smiling in the sunlight, laughing at something he had said. Her hair pulled back, her eyes bright. It was a moment frozen in joy, and he had walked away from the real version of that moment, the living, breathing woman behind the picture when she needed him most. He closed his eyes, gripping the edges of the photo. "I'm sorry," he breathed. "I'm so sorry." But apologies spoken to paper had no power, and apologies whispered in an empty room offered no healing. Not for Patricia, not for Elise, not for him. For the first time, Joseph understood that the courtroom ruling was not punishment. It was the beginning of consequences, ones he deserved, and obligations, ones he owed, and redemption, something he would have to earn step by step, quietly, without expectation of applause. But he also understood something deeper. He wanted to be in Elise's life, not out of guilt, not out of court orders, but because he had a daughter, a real daughter, and she deserved a father who showed up. He sat on the couch slowly, holding the photo to his chest. The weight of years pressed into his shoulders, but beneath it, something small and determined began to move. Like the first breath after admitting a hurt you hid too long. "I'm going to do better," he whispered, more to himself than to the photo. "I'm going to be there." Outside, the city pulsed with its usual Friday rhythm. Cars passing, people laughing on balconies, restaurants filling up. But Joseph remained still, letting himself feel every ounce of what he'd avoided for half a decade. It wasn't weakness. It was the price of finally telling the truth. Meanwhile, back in Beaumont, Patricia and Elise returned home. Camille had stayed behind at the diner but sent a text checking on them. The house felt familiar, grounding. As soon as they stepped inside, Elise ran to her room, humming softly while digging through her toy box. Patricia stood in the doorway for a long moment, letting her shoulders relax. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd held herself all day. Her throat felt sore, too many emotions pressed through too small a space. She moved to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of sweet tea, and sat at the table. The afternoon sun streamed in, lighting the worn wood in front of her. She placed her fingertips against the surface and exhaled. The court hearing wasn't just about money. It wasn't even just about responsibility. It had forced her to say out loud what she had lived in silence for years, and there was a strange kind of strength in that. She thought about Joseph's confession, the way his voice cracked, the sincerity in his eyes, the way he didn't lean on excuses even though he could have. That part surprised her. Not enough to erase the hurt, but enough to stir something complicated in her chest. She didn't know if Joseph could change. She didn't know if she wanted him close. She didn't know how she felt beyond exhausted. But she did know one thing. Elise had a father now, not theoretically, not legally, but emotionally. Because the man who walked into that courtroom today was not the same man who had left her years ago. And that mattered. She took another slow sip of tea and let the quiet settle around her. Then Elise padded into the kitchen, clutching her toy bear. "Mommy, are you okay?" Patricia offered her a tired smile. "Yeah, baby, just thinking." Elise climbed into her lap, small arms wrapping around her waist. "About the man?" Patricia's breath caught. "What man?" "The one who was looking at you like he was sad." Patricia swallowed. "Yes, him. Is he a friend?" The ache returned, a soft, emotional ache. "He's someone who might become important in your life." Elise nodded, satisfied with the answer, and rested her head against her mother's chest. Patricia smoothed her daughter's hair gently, the rhythm soothing them both. Redemption doesn't begin in the courtroom. It begins in the small promises we choose to make, and the even smaller ones we choose to keep, and somewhere between the steady pulse of her daughter's breathing and the echo of Judge Reese's words, Patricia felt the day shifting into something new. Not healed, not resolved, but ready for the next chapter, a chapter Joseph would now have to earn his way into. Joseph stood in the soft Texas sunlight, his palms lightly sweating as he waited near the playground bench. Beaumont's air carried the familiar warmth he hadn't felt in years, the kind that held onto the skin like an old memory. Parents chatted nearby, a couple of kids chased each other around the slide, and somewhere behind him a dog barked once before settling back into a lazy sprawl under a tree. But none of that mattered, not today. Today was the day he would meet his daughter. Patricia approached slowly, walking across the grass with Elise's small hand tucked inside hers. Elise wore a sunflower yellow dress, her curls pulled back into a loose ponytail that bounced with each step. Her gaze was curious but cautious, big eyes taking in everything, including the nervous man standing by the bench. Joseph exhaled, steadying himself. His heart thumped so hard he could feel it in his throat. Patricia gave him a brief nod, firm, controlled, protective. A mother's nod, a nod that said, "Don't make a single mistake today." He deserved that. When they reached him, Patricia knelt beside Elise. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "this is Joseph." A pause, a meaningful one. Joseph swallowed. He crouched to Elise's height, hands resting on his knees, keeping a gentle distance. "Hi," he said quietly. "It's really nice to meet you." Elise peeked up at Patricia, then back to him. "Hi," one small word, but his chest tightened anyway. Sometimes the first word between two people carries the weight of years, and sometimes it's just a doorway opening a few inches, inviting you to step forward carefully. Patricia guided Elise a little closer. "Joseph brought something for you," she said. Her tone wasn't encouraging or discouraging, just factual, steady, making sure every moment had structure Elise could trust. Joseph reached into a small gift bag beside him. "If you'd like," he murmured. He pulled out a soft, caramel-colored plush rabbit with big floppy ears, nothing flashy, nothing overwhelming, just gentle, simple, childlike. Elise's eyes brightened. "It's cute," she whispered. Joseph held it out slowly. I thought maybe you'd like something soft to hold. My mom used to give me things like this when I was little." His voice faded a bit at the mention, another reminder that his own childhood grief had shaped more of him than he ever admitted. Elise stepped closer, took the rabbit into her arms and held it to her chest. "Thank you." 2 words, still small, still tender, but they landed like sunlight breaking through cloud cover. Joseph let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Patricia watched closely, arms crossed, every muscle alert. She was letting this happen, but she was watching for any sign of danger, inconsistency, or disappointment. A mother's vigilance never slept. "Do you like to play on the swings?" Joseph asked gently. Elise nodded. She looked at Patricia for permission. Patricia gave a small nod back. "I'll be right here." Elise walked toward the swing set, clutching the rabbit with one hand. Joseph followed, careful not to move too quickly, careful not to crowd her. Patricia remained by the bench, watching them with eyes sharpened by years of responsibility and heartbreak. When Elise sat on the swing, Joseph knelt briefly to adjust the chains. "Is this okay?" he asked. She nodded again. "Do you want a little push? Just a little?" He smiled softly. You got it. He pushed gently, the swing moving in a slow rhythm, safe, controlled, warm. Elise giggled faintly, leaning forward each time her feet lifted from the ground. Joseph let the sound wash over him. That giggle, he'd never heard it before today, and now it felt like the most important sound in his life. Healing doesn't always begin with forgiveness. Sometimes it begins with a moment, a laugh, a gesture, a softness you thought life had taken from you. After a few pushes, Elise spoke again. "Joseph?" His heart jumped. "Yes? Are you my dad?" Time slowed. He stepped closer, kneeling so he could face her without the swing pulling her away. Patricia stiffened on the bench, but she didn't intervene. Not yet. Joseph placed a hand lightly on the swing's chain, not touching her, just steadying the moment. "Yes," he said softly. "I am." Elise looked down at the rabbit in her hand. "Where were you?" Joseph felt every ounce of his past hit him like a wave. Not anger, not accusation, just the innocent truth of a child trying to understand her world. He glanced at Patricia. She didn't shake her head. She didn't look away. She let the question stand. Joseph answered carefully. "I was far away, and I made a mistake. A big one." His voice tightened. "I should have been here. I should have been with you and your mom. And I'm really sorry I wasn't." Elise looked at him, studying his face with the surprisingly intuitive gaze of a young child. She lifted her small hand and touched the corner of his beard. Curious, gentle. Joseph's breath hitched. "You feel scratchy," she said softly. He laughed, quiet, emotional. Yeah, I guess I do." Elise smiled faintly and leaned back into the swing again, letting the breeze brush her cheeks. "Can you push me again?" "Of course," he whispered. He stepped behind her, giving another gentle push, his eyes filling as he watched her sway forward, sunlight catching in her curls. Patricia let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her chest warmed, not with forgiveness, but with a fragile hope she never expected to feel again. After a while, Elise hopped off the swing and walked toward the slide. Joseph followed at a respectful distance. Patricia rose from the bench and walked over to stand near him. "She's opening up," she said quietly. He nodded. "She's incredible." Patricia softened, just a little. "She is." They watched Elise climb the slide ladder, rabbit tucked under her arm. The sun hit her dress, making the yellow fabric glow. "Thank you for letting me do this," Joseph murmured. "I know it wasn't easy." "It wasn't," Patricia replied honestly. "But it was right." A pause, not uncomfortable. Just honest air between two people trying to figure out how to rebuild something that once shattered. "I'm not asking for anything," Joseph said. "Not forgiveness, not a spot in your life. I just want to be there for her, whatever that looks like." Patricia didn't speak right away. She watched Elise slide down, laughing as she landed in a soft patch of grass. "You'll have to prove it," Patricia said softly, "with consistency, not promises." "That's fair," he replied. Another moment passed. Elise ran toward them, holding up the rabbit like a trophy. "Look how fast I went." Joseph crouched down again, smiling. "You were so fast. I'm proud of you." Elise giggled, leaning into his shoulder just for a second, just long enough to make Patricia's breath catch. It was a beginning, a fragile one, but a beginning nonetheless. Some doors don't open with apologies. They open with presence, with patience, with showing up long after words fade. And in that moment, under the golden Beaumont sky, with laughter ringing faintly through the park, Joseph felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, not for redemption, not for romance, but for the first trembling steps of fatherhood. A new chapter had begun, one he was determined not to run from. The heat settled differently that week in Beaumont. It wasn't harsh or stifling, just warm enough to feel like the air was paying attention. Joseph felt it each morning when he stepped outside his hotel, coat slung over his arm, mind already drifting toward Elise and the small, gentle moments he'd been allowed to share with her. He hadn't expected fatherhood to feel like this, like someone had taken a missing piece of his life and clicked it quietly, delicately, into place. It wasn't comfortable yet. It wasn't familiar, but it was right. Every afternoon, he'd drive from the hotel to the park or Patricia's neighborhood, hands tight around the steering wheel until he saw Elise's little frame bounding toward him. She didn't run into his arms, not yet, but she smiled. and that smile carried enough light to soften corners inside Joseph he didn't know were sharp. Patricia watched everything with cautious eyes. She never hovered, but she never drifted far either. She was measuring him, not by his words, but by his follow-through. Joseph knew it, and he didn't hold it against her. One of her conditions had been simple: consistency. No disappearing, no excuses. Each day he returned proved he understood. But while fatherhood stirred something steady inside him, work, the empire he'd built, the identity he'd lived in, was beginning to strain. On Thursday afternoon, his partner Colin called with the urgency of someone who had never been told no in his life. "Where are you?" Colin asked immediately. "In Beaumont," Joseph answered. "Still, you've been there nearly a week. I know." Colin's breath came out fast and irritated. "We need you in person. Tokyo wants an answer by tomorrow. This is the biggest expansion we've ever been offered. We're talking multi-year projections that could reshape our valuation." Joseph stared at his reflection in the hotel lobby mirror. He looked tired, but not the kind of tired that came from lack of sleep, the kind that came from growing. "I'm not flying out," Joseph said. Silence. "Come again?" Colin asked, tone sharpening. "I'm not flying out," Joseph repeated. "Not this time. You're throwing away a multi-million-dollar deal because you suddenly want to play dad?" Joseph closed his eyes briefly. "I'm choosing my daughter. That's not the same thing." "This is insane," Colin snapped. "You've worked your whole life for opportunities like this." "Yeah," Joseph said quietly, "and somewhere along the way, I let those opportunities replace my actual life." Colin scoffed. "This is a mistake." "Maybe," Joseph said, "but it's mine to make." He ended the call before Colin could argue further. The decision sat in his chest with an unexpected peace. He'd spent so many years moving at a pace that didn't allow him to think, only to chase. But when he pictured Elise's shy smile, her hand reaching for the plush rabbit he'd given her, the way she'd begun to call him dad in small, almost whispered moments, the choice didn't feel like loss. It felt like realignment, a sacrifice maybe, but one that finally made sense. That evening, Patricia stood in her kitchen stirring a pot of gumbo, the aroma filling the small home with the kind of comfort that carried history. Elise sat at the table coloring, humming softly to herself. Patricia wasn't thinking about food. She was thinking about Joseph. She'd seen something shifting in him the past few days, something she never expected to witness. Not forced effort, not performative guilt, but genuine presence. He showed up daily. He listened. He gave Elise space to warm up naturally. He never pushed, never asked for more than Patricia allowed. He accepted boundaries with quiet respect. She didn't trust him fully, not yet, maybe not for a long time, but she couldn't pretend she didn't see the change. Her phone buzzed. A message from Joseph appeared. "Would it be okay if I saw Elise tomorrow afternoon, if she wants to?" She stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Before she could answer, Elise spoke without even looking up. "Is Joseph coming tomorrow?" Patricia paused. "Do you want him to?" A small smile tugged at Patricia's lips. "Okay, I'll tell him." She typed back, "Yes, afternoon is fine." The next day brought a clear sky, bright but not overpowering. Joseph arrived early, heart steadying the moment he saw Elise run out of the house, her shoes untied as usual, curls wild from the breeze. "Daddy," she called. The word froze him. He knelt as she reached him, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, not tight, not urgent, just a simple, honest embrace. Patricia stepped outside onto the porch. She saw the moment, and something warm flickered in her chest, a small flame she tried not to name. "Where are we going today?" Elise asked. Joseph smiled. "Your mom said the park or the library. You choose." "Park!" Elise shouted immediately. Patricia shook her head fondly. "Bring her back before dinner." "We will," Joseph said, and they left together, hand in hand. Later that night, Patricia received the call. Joseph's voice was frantic. "Patricia, it's Elise. She's not breathing right. She's wheezing and saying her chest hurts. I'm taking her to the emergency clinic now." Patricia's heart slammed into her ribs. "Which one?" "The one off Dowlin, closest I could get to fast. I'm on my way." She grabbed her keys, barely remembering to lock the door. The drive felt endless even though she sped through familiar streets, tracing a path she'd driven during fevers and late-night scares since Elise had been born. When she rushed into the clinic, she found Joseph pacing the hallway, his face pale, his shirt damp near the collar as if he'd been holding Elise close during the worst of it. The moment he saw Patricia, he exhaled shakily. She's inside. They're monitoring her. They think it's a flare-up triggered by the season. Patricia nodded, tears threatening. Where is she? He led her toward the room, and there Elise sat on the exam table, eyes droopy, breathing steadier now, clutching the plush rabbit. Mommy, she whispered. Patricia rushed forward, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Baby, you scared me. Joseph stood behind them, hands shaking slightly, his voice barely holding together. I didn't know what to do but get her here. She started coughing so hard. You did the right thing, Patricia said, turning toward him. She meant it, fully. His eyes shone, not from pride but from the weight of how deeply he cared. After the nurse checked on Elise and confirmed she would be okay, Patricia stepped into the hallway needing a breath. Joseph followed. She leaned against the wall, exhaling. You handled everything. He shook his head. I was terrified. Parenting is terrifying, she said softly. You just learned it today. He looked at her, something raw in his expression. I never understood what you went through, what you carried alone. I'm so sorry, Patricia. For everything. His voice cracked. Tears gathered at the corners of his eyes. Patricia stepped closer, slowly, cautiously, and reached for his hand. It surprised them both. I know, she whispered. I know you're sorry, and I'm tired of carrying anger so heavy it hurts my back. Joseph covered his face with his free hand, shoulders shaking once as he exhaled a breath he'd been holding for years. Patricia moved closer, not embracing him fully, but leaning gently into him, sharing the same air, the same moment, the same tremble of relief. In that quiet hallway under the soft clinic lights, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not romance, but the beginning of healing. Some people wait a lifetime for a moment where pain finally loosens its grip, and sometimes it takes a crisis to remind two hearts that healing doesn't come from distance, but from presence. Joseph lowered his hand and looked at Patricia, eyes wet but steady. I'm not going anywhere, not ever again. She squeezed his fingers. Then show me. Show her. They stood in silence, the kind that didn't wound but soothed. Elise's soft voice floated from inside the room. Daddy. Joseph blinked, emotion flooding him anew. I'm right here. He walked back in, and Patricia followed, standing beside him this time, not across from him. For the first time in years they felt like a team. Not a couple, not yet, but a team built on truth, responsibility, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Morning light touched Beaumont gently the next day, the kind of light that didn't rush in or make demands. It simply settled across rooftops and front porches like a quiet blessing. Patricia stood on hers, arms folded lightly, watching the street wake up while Elise finished tying her shoes inside. Not fixed, not finished, but different. After the long night at the clinic, Elise had slept curled against Patricia's side, breathing steady and peaceful. Joseph had stayed in a chair beside the bed until the nurse insisted he go home and rest. He'd hesitated, almost stubbornly, until Patricia met his eyes and said gently, She's okay, go sleep. He had nodded once, slow and tired, before leaving with a look that held more meaning than any words they'd exchanged the entire week. Now Patricia stood on her porch as his car pulled up to the curb. The engine clicked off. He stepped out, hair slightly messy, shirt untucked, looking like someone who'd been awake more than asleep, but there was something softer in his face, too. He approached the porch steps, stopping just before them. How is she this morning? Better, Patricia said. She's in a good mood, hungry, as usual. That's a good sign. His smile was small but real. Elise burst through the doorway at that moment, nearly tripping over her own excitement. Daddy, look, I tied them by myself. She lifted her foot proudly. Joseph crouched, examining the laces with theatrical seriousness. That might be the best bow I've ever seen. Elise grinned, balancing on one foot. Patricia watched the exchange, warmth blooming quietly in her chest. This wasn't the man who walked out years ago. This wasn't the man who hid behind ambition and excuses. This was someone trying, tired, imperfect, scared, but trying with everything in him. Can we go to church today? Elise asked suddenly, still hanging on Joseph's shoulder. Patricia blinked. Elise always enjoyed Sunday service, but she wasn't usually the one to bring it up. Joseph's eyebrows lifted. Church? Elise nodded. I want you to come. You said yesterday you like singing and church is singing. Patricia studied Joseph's face. He hesitated, not out of reluctance but out of humility. Church wasn't just church for Patricia. It was community, eyes that watched, hearts that judged, people who had whispered during her pregnancy, who had prayed over her struggles, who had surrounded her when she raised Elise alone. Church was sacred ground, and also vulnerable ground. But Joseph didn't retreat. He looked at Patricia with quiet sincerity. If it's okay with your mom, I'd like to. Patricia held his gaze for several seconds. Then she nodded. It's okay. The small brick church on the corner of the neighborhood was already humming with morning greetings and warm embraces when they arrived. Patricia felt familiar comfort as she walked Elise inside, but today, every pair of eyes carried an extra beat of curiosity. Not judgment, just curiosity. Joseph had not been in this building for years. He stepped in behind them, shoulders a little stiff, hands tucked in his pockets. A couple of the older church mothers recognized Patricia and whispered to each other, glancing toward Joseph. One of them, a kind woman with gentle eyes, gave Patricia a knowing nod that said, "We see you, and we're proud." During service, Elise squeezed between them in the pew. When the choir rose for a hymn, Joseph stood with the congregation. The music filled the room, powerful, warm, alive. Patricia felt the familiar ache in her chest that always came when voices lifted together. She glanced sideways and saw Joseph blinking rapidly, jaw tight. Some memories cut deep, some heal deeper. After service, Judge Reese greeted congregants near the exit, shaking hands. When Patricia and Elise approached, he smiled. Good to see you both here, he said. Elise beamed. Daddy came too. Judge Reese's eyebrows rose slightly, though his expression stayed composed. He turned to Joseph, offering his hand. Mr. Caldwell. Joseph took it. Good morning, sir. The judge's voice softened just slightly. Life gives second chances, son. Use yours well. I intend to, Joseph said quietly. Patricia watched their exchange, her heart tugging between caution and something gentler. Later that afternoon, Patricia packed a small picnic basket, leftover cornbread, diced fruit, a couple of sandwiches, and a jar of sweet tea that had just the right amount of sugar. Elise bounced excitedly near the door. Are we going to the park with Daddy again? Yes, Patricia said, tying her shoes. Just for a few hours. Joseph arrived on time, so on time it almost startled her. They drove separately and met at a grassy clearing under a wide oak tree whose branches shaded the blanket Patricia spread out. The afternoon passed easily. Elise braided grass into tiny loops. Joseph attempted to learn the same skill and failed so miserably that Elise giggled uncontrollably. Patricia laughed despite herself, remembering the way he used to get frustrated over tying fishing knots during their early 20s. Some things don't change, she teased. He smiled. Some do. The day stretched warm and calm around them. Moments came and went, with a softness Patricia hadn't felt in years. Joseph handing Elise her juice box, Elise tugging at his sleeve to show him a beetle crawling nearby. Patricia resting her elbows on her knees and simply watching her daughter glow. When the sun dipped low, casting a golden wash over the park, Joseph stood and stretched. Let me walk you both home, Patricia didn't refuse. They walked slowly down the familiar street, Elise skipping ahead, Joseph and Patricia trailing behind her. The air smelled faintly of someone grilling 2 blocks over. A dog barked. Wind rustled the pecan trees. I wanted to tell you something, Joseph said quietly. Patricia glanced at him. I turned down the deal, he continued. The big one. The one that would take me overseas. Her steps faltered slightly. You did? Yes. Why? He exhaled. Because I don't want to miss anything else in her life, and I don't want to run from responsibility anymore. I built a career on chasing the next opportunity, the next city, the next contract. None of it mattered the way seeing her smile does. Patricia looked ahead at Elise, laughing as she hopped over cracks in the sidewalk, and felt something shift inside her. Not a light switch, more like a sunrise. And what about you and me? She asked softly, surprising even herself. Joseph slowed. I'm not asking for anything from you right now. Not forgiveness, not a relationship, not the past back. He swallowed. I just want to show you who I'm trying to become. If all we ever share is raising her together, I'll be grateful. If more grows from that, it'll be because you chose it freely, not because I asked. Her chest tightened with emotion she didn't speak aloud. They reached her house. Elise ran up the steps, rabbit in hand. Patricia lingered on the walkway, turning toward Joseph beneath the fading sunlight. For a long moment they simply stood there. Then Patricia stepped forward, rising onto her toes, and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. Not a promise, not a reconciliation, a beginning. Joseph's eyes softened with quiet awe. Patricia, good night, she whispered. He nodded, voice low. Good night. He walked toward his car but kept looking back at her, once, twice, like he couldn't quite believe the moment was real. Patricia watched him leave, hand resting on the porch rail, heart beating in a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. Inside, Elise called out, Mommy, come see what I drew. I'm coming, baby, Patricia replied. Before stepping inside, she let herself breathe in the night air one more time. Some stories aren't about starting over, they're about starting again, with the truth this time. The final family moment came later that week, Patricia, Joseph, and Elise walking together, hand in hand, down a Beaumont street glowing with sunset. Neighbors waved. Elise skipped. Joseph laughed softly. Patricia's shoulder brushed his once and neither stepped away. They looked like a family, a new kind of family, one built not from perfection but from courage. What would you do if life handed you the chance to heal what you once broke? And would you be brave enough to take it?